You're listening to The Secrets of Sacred Art, where we unearth the hidden treasures, history, and deeper meanings in religious and sacred art. We're your hosts, Katherine Laffrey
and Alix Murray. Welcome to episode 2 of The Secrets of Sacred Art, The Lights in the Vault of Heaven. In this episode, we're going to talk about a little bit of an art adventure that Katherine and I had when she came to visit me last May, if you can believe that, Katherine, 2022. I know. And, but this was something that was a long time coming. And so I always advise people if they're going to travel, because my family and I have done lots of traveling around the world. And I always think it's a good idea to get to know one place really well, rather than kind of spread yourself thin all over a country. You know, you just don't really get to see it in an intimate way and find those special little secrets. And so that's what I advise people to do. And Katherine, is that what we did when you came over to visit?
That is not what we did. We ran like wild women. You've got to see this.
I know. I know. I broke my own rule.
We got to go to this church. We got to go to that church.
Exactly. But you know what? The thing is, there was just so much I wanted to show you that you didn't stay long enough. You have to come back over. And it's, every part, I have to say this, every part of the British Isles is really amazing in terms of history, in terms of Catholic history, because of the, just everything that happened here. And it goes back just such a long way. I mean, where do you start? How long is a piece of string? I mean, that's kind of how you do history in this country. And so I did want to show you as much of this fair isle as I could. And
lucky
but not
you, I like exploring.
Yeah, exactly. And sitting in the car. But it was, yeah. But anyway,
yeah,
so
I definitely encourage people to get out there, explore.
Yes. Yeah.
There's always so much to find. I mean, in the littlest places, you might not even be familiar with every nook and cranny of your own parish. So it's fun to ask to see, hey, can I see what the sacristy looks like? Maybe there's some beautiful little piece of art that the priest has up.
Yeah.
And them get ready for Mass. You never know.
Absolutely.
That was a fun thing for us to see in one of our parishes, where the priest had a beautiful picture of the chalice that I think Pope Francis has. And he was given a replica of it to use at Mass. And so
wow.
It was kind of neat to see how he just uses that to get himself ready for Mass. So museums, churches, there's so many places. I mean, like your little part-time island that we went to.
Yes, part-time island. That's really cute. Yes.
I have to call Lindisfarne a part-time island, because that was the first time I have ever seen a piece of land like that goes from this little sandy peninsula to complete island.
Yeah.
With a lot of warning signs along the way.
I know. And again, the other thing that we encourage people to do, which is what we did with Lindisfarne, and it just became more and more fascinating the more we dug into it, is to look into the history of where your church is, who started this church, what religious order was here, and maybe even the name of your city or town. Certainly in the United States, you always know which day the city was founded, with the Catholic saint names. And I just think that's so cool. That's like really easy. Oh, that city was founded in this day. But yeah, so Lindisfarne is a very unique island in terms of its topography, but also in terms of its place in history, not only Christian history, but history in general. It's a really, really fascinating place. And if you want, I can start on a little bit of the history of the island. And again,
it's been a year since Lindisfarne, and I still feel it.
I know. It's so beautiful.
Just to be a little Frodo-ish there.
I know. Yeah, it is. So now Lindisfarne is located in the North Sea, and it's connected and separated by a tidal causeway. And that Katherine mentioned that a little bit. And it is a strong and fast tidal causeway. And you always have to have it in the back of your mind that the North Sea is not going to stop for you. And there's evidence of human activity on the island dating back to around 8,000 BC. There might have been a Roman fort on the island, but the Romans did call the island Insula Medicata, which means the healing island. So it's very interesting. The Celts knew it as Medcote, and the meaning of that word has been lost to time, so we don't know what that means. The name Lindisfarne is thought to mean retreat. And there are some tax records going back from around 700 mentioning a tribe called the Lindisi or Lindsay tribe, Lindsey. And they were present on the island after migrating there from an area near Doncaster, which is quite a ways south. And when you think about, they didn't have motorways and cars, so it was kind of impressive that they really wanted to, I think, be left alone on Lindisfarne. And so ultimately the name means Lindsay's retreat. And just a little side note to here, my maiden last name is Lindsay, Lindsey, and it's a very unusual spelling of the name. There's another spelling that is Scottish and another one that is Irish, but Lindsey, I never knew where that came from. And if it hadn't been for me doing this research, I never would have found out about the Lindisi tribe. And so if there are any Lindsays out there with the E in their name, you have a very old name and a little island
and it's
to
no
retreat
wonder
to.
you felt so at home in that area.
I know. Isn't that funny? That was like, that blew me away. That totally blew me away. But anyway, so now in 635, King Oswald of Northumberland asked Saint Aidan of Iona, and that's the other holy island, and you can look on the map that we have here. I guess we should tell people who are listening, we do have a lot of video references, and so we encourage you to take a look at the videos when you can. Obviously, all of these images are going to be in the links for the show, but it's definitely worth just looking at some really fascinating images that we'll have, and not just Katherine and me chatting with each other. But if you look on the map, you have Iona, which is off the coast of Scotland, and Lindisfarne, which is off the coast of England in the north. And so Saint Aidan traveled from Iona to Lindisfarne, and under his guidance, the priory of Lindisfarne became the center of ecclesiastical life in the north. So it was a very important place of study and faith there. And it was a missionary, I think I mentioned, it was a missionary community. And in 664, Saint Cuthbert became the prior of Lindisfarne, and he's another very famous saint, and we'll be talking about him and where he's buried. And one of the things that he did was he actually regularized the Celtic liturgical calendar with the Roman liturgical calendar, especially as it pertains to the Easter season. So that was his big significant thing that he did in this country. And in 676, Cuthbert retired to a hermitage, which is on another island not far from Lindisfarne, and he died in 687. And after his death, the island became a place of pilgrimage for people all over Europe, not just the British Isles, but Europe. And in the early 700s, the Lindisfarne Gospels were created, and we're going to be talking about them. It's one of the most famous, most beautiful Gospels ever created. And they were created by Eadfrith, who was the Bishop of Lindisfarne. And he was bishop from 698 to 721. Now, on the 8th of June in 793, Vikings landed on the shores of Lindisfarne, and the island's fate changed forever. And it was a difficult year already. And one Anglo-Saxon chronicler described the events as follows. There were dreadful forewarnings come over the land of Northumbria. Woefully terrified were the people. These were amazing sheets of lightning, and whirlwinds, and fiery dragons were seen flying in the sky. A great famine soon followed these signs, and shortly after, in the same year, on the 6th day before the Ides of January, the woeful inroads of heathen men destroyed God's church on Lindisfarne Island by fierce robbery and slaughter. And for the next 82 years, the island was subject to regular Viking raids, and it was finally abandoned in 875. And then we visited it. And here we have a couple of, you can see the Holy Island and how the Vikings came to shore. And there's a fantastic medieval image. It looks like it's probably from a manuscript, and it's got the island in the middle and all of these Viking ships with, I guess they did have red sails. There are a lot of contemporary descriptions of them seeing those red sails coming over the horizon and really panicking. You can't see the red sails here, but you can get a sense of the island really being vulnerable and closed in by all those ships. And
I love how in this image, the island is this cute little circle and the 6 ships completely surrounding it. There's no hope.
No hope.
Compared to the actual shape of the island, which is this funny little elongation.
Kind of looks like a dragon's head to me.
It really does. It has a mouth and eye and everything.
I know. I think that might be the tower or something. There's a castle on the island too, but we won't talk about that. Yeah. Now, one of the things I thought was interesting, and Katherine, I really want to get your impressions of your first impressions of the island, because this has been something that's been in my consciousness, I think, for a very long time, having lived in really Northern Europe and then in Britain. Holy Islands are kind of just part of my life. And so I don't remember a time I wasn't aware of Lindisfarne or Iona, but you had never heard about it before. And so I would love to hear some of your impressions. And I'm sure some of the listeners, there are listeners who've never heard of it. So why don't you give us an idea of what it was like to first see this place and hear about this place?
It's interesting because being in Michigan, I'm used to islands also my whole life, for different reasons. There was Boblo Island, which was a little fun adventure place to go. And then we have Mackinac Island and the Manitou Islands and all the islands within the Great Lakes. So for me, the best thing to do when I'm approaching a place like that is I always want to see how far off I can see it. So for me, having our trip along the coast as it did allowed me to try to find it as far out as I could. And I remember that first glimpse I have of it. You just have this little crest of land out in the water, and you could see a little bit of the castle that's on the island and a few other points. But I was surprised at how just long and stretched out and flat it was.
Yeah.
So it didn't really come up strongly out of the water.
It was like raising out of the water like some great beast. Yeah. No, it's flat.
It's not like the island I expected. Like Luke Skywalker was on that big giant,
exactly.
Sticking up from the water. No, nothing.
No, that's down in Ireland.
It's like wrong side of the water here.
Yeah.
But it was just such a beautiful trip. And just knowing where it was within the, English countryside and everything, and just the whole drive to it was fascinating. What was crazy was knowing that we had a very tight schedule to stick to.
Yeah, we did.
Thankfully for Donald, your husband, very clear instructions as to this is when high tide is, this is when low tide is. Don't be driving during high tide.
Yeah, and because every year somebody gets stuck. Somebody's car, and it's really, the tide is so strong and cars get swept away, and it's a little bit scary. Like, it was weird. I was thinking about this. I wonder if this is what it felt like to be on the island, especially right after the raids. Because when you get onto the island, it's really peaceful and it's beautiful, and the spirituality is still there. This sense of being really connected with this ancient Catholic faith is definitely there. And so there's peace, and in calm with that. But at the same time, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, okay, what time is it? Because we've got to get off this island. We've got to get off this island. And I just wonder if it was kind of like that, with the monks going to Vespers and in prayer. But if they saw those red sails coming over the horizon, what to do? Because they would have about an hour between the sighting of the sails to prepare for the raid. And that is not a long time at all.
Yeah, and then I just thought, oh my gosh, if that was during high tide and you can't run very far, you're stuck.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know how it would work. Like, it's interesting. So on the other side where the Vikings would have been coming to the island, if that side was tidal as well, I don't know. I should have looked it up.
Go up and down all around the island for sure.
Yeah. So they wouldn't have been able, but do you know what? I hate to say this. If the Vikings wanted to get onto your island, a tide is not going to stop them. No,
they know what to do. They were such great sailors.
Exactly. Those longboats are amazing. Amazing.
We'll talk about amazing. Okay. Kudos to the road crews who put down this road. To know that it's getting washed over, sometimes twice a day.
Yeah. At least, it is twice a day.
Underwater, right?
Yeah. What made me nervous was the posts along the road. I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? And then you can't go really fast. Like my instinct would be, let's hurry up and get on the island, and let's hurry and get up and get off the island. But there's one road. So if there are people leaving, you have to pull over to the side and wait. And I was just like, don't you people know there's a tide coming?
What's interesting, in Michigan, we have a lot of roads that are along dammed up rivers. So there's times where your car actually dips under the level of the river or lake that you're driving next to.
Yeah.
It freaks you out for a second till you come up on the other side. We have one not far from us where you actually go about 12 feet below the level of the water on the other side of the dam next to you.
Yeah.
Here, going across, knowing you're literally seafloor level.
Yeah.
When we got to the middle of that, it got really quiet in the car.
It did. We're like, can we just...
You're looking back and forth, and you see these posts way above the height of your head.
Yeah.
Like, yep, let's get to the other side. Get to the other side.
Yeah. It was really a little nerve-wracking, but then we got to the island, and the sigh of relief, and it was it was amazing. We saw some things that were very familiar to us. The ruins of the Abbey. Now these ruins would have been the Abbey that had been rebuilt. I think the ones that the Abbey or the Priory, that the Vikings would have raided, that was not built of stone. That was probably, wooden posts and some kind of thatched roofs, maybe some stones, but not really. But when they returned to the island, and we haven't really talked about this because that's actually going to be for another podcast. So there's another connection, and keep listening because you'll get the connection. These were the ruins that we saw, the sandstone ruins. And
it took me a moment to get the timeline in my head.
Yeah.
You always hear about the Viking raids, and I was like, oh, look what they did. And then it's like, oh no, that was after the Viking raids.
Yeah.
This was destroyed later, which is
another story.
For another time.
Yeah, another story. Somebody else destroyed this one. But anyway, but also to see the familiarity of it was really interesting, I think.
It's funny you said familiarity, because what did I say? As soon as I got on that island, this reminds me of...
Yeah.
I was like, this is like Mackinac Island. A little older, but
it had
the same feel. And I went and looked at, and I have up here satellite images of the Manitou Islands, the Holy Island in the middle, and Mackinac Island. And they all have bays that face essentially to the southeast or the east. And when you think about it, for an island to have a landing like that, it gives you a sheltered place from the prevailing winds, which would be moving that way. So you have the winds coming out of the west,
Yeah.
And on all these islands, those bays are a nice deep point. So it's easy for ships to come ashore.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, it's great for fishing and all the other activities that are happening on the island.
Yeah.
And there were activities like that. Holy Island has its own little town. And you need to, have a way to take care of yourself. But,
yeah.
to have that similarity, it really struck me. It's like, okay, this explains a lot about how things happen and move in and around island communities.
Yeah. And one of the things, so going back to Lindisfarne, so we're making as you said, making all of these connections, trying to figure out what are we looking at here, because we were looking at, we were trying to find, in terms of sacred art, what were they trying to do? What were the messages they were trying to communicate to people? Because remember, this was a missionary community. So they were going out and evangelizing to people who were not Christians at the time. And how do you communicate this information to them? Because if you are trying to communicate to someone and you're not speaking their language to some capacity, you're actually not telling them anything, And so it was really important for them to create images and that the people there would understand and would relate to. And of course, I think the ultimate example of that is the Lindisfarne Gospels. But when we were on this island, there's a nice little museum. And by the way, they totally redid the museum. So you'll have to go back. And
it was really lovely.
I know.
A lot of great artifacts. I was surprised at how much they found.
Yeah.
Of course,
and they're still finding
I had
stuff.
To read about it.
Yeah.
Finding all the digging they're still doing.
I know. They found something last year and I wish I could remember what it was. But it's something like it's Iron Age or something. It's amazing. But we made our own discovery on the island in the museum. And it's something called the Doomsday Stone or the Viking Raider Stone.
Oh, we got
and yes, absolutely. So you can see here, we've got a close-up image of the Viking raid manuscript that Katherine had on before. But it's just one of the ships. And you can see even the fish are trying to keep them away from the island. Yeah. It's very sad. Anyway, and then to the right, you have the Doomsday Stone. And this is the back of the Doomsday Stone is a commemoration. It's commemorating the Viking raid. I would say commemorating, memorializing, maybe. I don't think they were really happy about it, but they wanted to let people know this happened.
It puts a timestamp on this stone.
It does. And so this happened, obviously, after the raid. And it was discovered in the 19th century, and it was given the name in the 19th century, the Doomsday Stone. So it's not like something, we don't know what it was called, if it was called anything. It could be a grave marker. It most likely is a grave marker. So it could have been somebody who was maybe killed in the raid or had survived the raids, maybe.
Yeah, it could have been someone who was very heroic during the raids.
Yeah.
Up to how many little guys we got there?
Seven.
Raiders.
Yeah. So
I love how their carving and the painting, they both have their little stripy lines on their outfits.
Yeah, that's thought to have been a type of chain mail. Okay. But how do you show chain mail when you've got a quill and ink and maybe a paintbrush, maybe chisel? Yeah, exactly. So and it probably was much more detailed. Over 1,000 years ago, but it's obvious it's sandstone, so it can be worn quite quickly. But just to give you a little bit of a description of the Doomsday Stone, there are 7 warriors. These are the Viking warriors coming, and each warrior is holding either an axe or a sword. And they're very close to one another, and they almost give the impression of charging forward, and kind of their knees are pumping and weapons are raised, and you just kind of get the feeling if these guys were coming after you, you were not going to escape. This
Alix,
must have.
Have you watched The Secret of Kells? Because you told me about it first.
Yeah.
The way that they showed the raiders in that cartoon.
Yeah.
helped make this piece a little more intense for me.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
then you kind of have a sound in your head or imagining just the ominous threat
Yeah.
of them coming ashore.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and it must have been really, it must have been absolutely terrifying to see these raiders come from nowhere. Now, I do have to say, this was probably not, well, I know this wasn't the first Viking raid in Britain. The first one took place in Mercia. And, but this was the first, this was so devastating because of Lindisfarne's prominence in Christendom, and also the people who were
How far
raided.
away is Mercia? Sorry.
I live in Mercia.
Oh.
So, yeah, Midlands.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's quite a ways.
Yeah. In fact, you walk down a road by my house that was like it said something like Old Mercia Road. It was like a little bronze guy, Anglo-Saxon guy.
Okay. I missed
Totally missed it. It was by the car park next to the bridge. But anyway.
There you go.
Yeah. So that was the first Viking raid, but because of the prominence of Lindisfarne in Christendom, and also because the people who had been raided could write, and they recorded what had happened to them, and that information was actually shared throughout Christendom, and it was a shock. It was a shock to everybody, not just in Britain, but all over Christendom, what had happened to Lindisfarne. It was really, the impact was huge, huge. And so if we could go to maybe, do you have you must have another picture of the other side. So everyone typically...
I do have the other side. This
okay.
is the side that caught my attention in the museum.
Exactly.
I was looking at everything else and I saw this and I was like, I've seen that before.
Yeah. And then most people are interested in the side with the Vikings, because that's really exciting and it's violent and you know, everybody loves Vikings, but we did look at this other side, and you actually called me over, and I was like, whoa, look at that. And so this is the other side, the side that doesn't always keep people, it's not as interesting, I think, but it's fascinating. And so what we have on the other side is kind of a plain cross. It does have the 4 angles that are curved in that you would typically see on a Celtic cross, but it doesn't have the arches, the 4 arches that would form a circle around the cross. So it is relatively plain for a Celtic cross, and it doesn't have any kind of decorations. Now, to the left of the cross, above, and we should say that this is like a dome, like a vaulted type of shape, and
imagine a classic tombstone shape.
Yeah. And on one side is just a very simple disc that represents the sun, and that's to the left. And on to the right of to the cross, the upper part of the cross, is a crescent, and that is supposed to represent the moon. At the base of the cross on the left is a figure with their arms raised in like an Oron's posture with the head down. And the figure on the right has both hands together in a manner that, you know, maybe we could interpret it as a gesture of prayer or supplication. But what
sorrow position too, with the hands.
It could be, yeah, exactly. And if you look on the figure to the right, you can see what looks a little bit like maybe something across their head, like some kind of band, and even a little bit of a cape kind of showing. Of course, a lot of this is worn away. A lot of the details are worn away just because of the age. And so what I find interesting is on either side of the arms of the cross, you have 2 hands coming out towards the cross, and they're reaching out from the curved edges of the stone. And you're just wondering, are they highlighting the cross? Are they presenting the cross? What is going on here? And so this is something that we found was really, you know, this I think we just stood here and stared at this for a long time going, what are we looking at? We know what we're looking at, but what are we looking at? The information about this cross was very limited. The gravestone, so they're calling it a gravestone, and it could be because they have a number of gravestones there. And it's thought to be from around the 9th century. Both sides, the carving on either side are believed to have been contemporary of one another. So they're probably made very close. So there was no repurposing of the stone one way or another. So these things were done together, which I think you also have to take into account. So why was that, so what are we looking at here? They're trying to give us some information. And what is the information they're giving us? The museum said they really had no information about it. And so that's when we really decided to do some digging. I will say this, the name of the Doomsday Stone was taken from a quote from Alcuin, who was a scholar and taught Charlemagne's children at the time of the raid on Lindisfarne. And he felt like this was a punishment from God for some things that had happened or had been allowed to happen on the island. And so the name comes from Alcuin's quote, but sorry, I got this wrong. So he was about 100 years after the raid, and he was talking about the raid. So they're still talking about the raid 100 years later. And it was from his quote that the stone was given the name, the Doomsday Stone. So it has nothing to do with what it was originally. And so my question to you, Katherine, is, so English Heritage, who has they're the custodians of the island, they think this is an image that references the apocalypse. But what do you think?
What happened, the reason why it stuck out to me so much is because I had been doing a lot of research before even going to the island to work on a commission I was asked to do. And here's all my research spewed out across my desk at the time. And I have all these images of the crucifixion of Christ from different time periods. Some are mosaic, some are icons, some are manuscripts. The thing that struck me was how many of them had the sun and moon on either side. And if you read in the Bible, there's a lot of different times where that's brought up. There's Old Testament writings, New Testament writings. And we, in the crucifixion of Christ, hear about there's the eclipse of the sun, or the sun being darkened. And so that's why that sun and moon is there. It's letting you know something real happened on this day. This is when Christ was crucified. And so to me, I knew right away I was looking at a scene of the crucifixion of Christ that had to in some way tied into that. And I found it fascinating that there was no mention of that as a possible description when we were in the museum.
No, none at all, none whatsoever. And I think, oh my gosh, and I think another thing about the sun and the moon is this is something that everybody has in common. So if you're a missionary community going out and you can connect with people with something that they see every day and every night, and how does this relate to this image that we're looking at? So it's not an image, it's not something incorporating a pagan idea into Christian theology or Christian imagery so they can, so we can relate to this now. And that's not what it is. It's something that, people notice the moon and the sun. Everybody on earth notices that, no matter how long they happen to be staying, they stay in the sky. I happen to live in a part of the world where sometimes the sun isn't up for very long, and sometimes never goes down. But
yeah, you and I both in the northern
exactly. Yeah. So it is something that everyone could relate to, but how do we relate to this? And you're talking about, of course, the crucifixion, the eclipse of the sun. So this would, the moon overshadowing the sun is something that happened during the crucifixion of our Lord. But the moon and the sun have meant things symbolically in Christian art, and even before that, even in Jewish art, going back to the Old Testament and the lights in the sky, things that are created not to be worshipped, but they're the moon and the sun are things that the Creator or God made. And one of the things I think was interesting is to connect it to Scripture. Saint Augustine really felt like the moon in the Old Testament, the moon represented the Old Testament, and the sun represented the New Testament. And so you have the moon reflecting the sun, or the sun highlighting the moon. So in other words, the Old Testament is illuminated by the New Testament. So they go together. And that is something that these missionary monks would have understood, and they would have known this as well. That, they were there not too long after Augustine had written these things. And so when they were doing these images, were they also referring and trying to communicate to people information about Scripture, the New Testament highlighting the Old Testament and that sort of thing. Now, what's interesting
helps with the fact that this is more than likely a gravestone. It fits the shape of a lot of others from the time period that we saw and that are out there. Knowing that it was probably put up, it could have been for someone from the first raid. Very real possibility.
Yeah.
Because you have the raid on the one side,
and
then on the other side you have that death and destruction. On the other side, to have the hope of new life in Christ.
The hope of the resurrection. Yeah.
Through the resurrection, the crucifixion. So yeah.
It's absolutely. And I think, this is something that they would have regularly. And what else? I guess I was thinking about this when you're talking about the other gravestones. We know that these people were literate or lettered, shall I say. I like to always think of imagery and art as being just another code that we need to learn how to read, just like we can read whatever language we read. This is another language. And so they were lettered. They would have had the ability to write down who this was and how they died, because we saw gravestones that had people's names written on them and who they were, or what their roles were. This was something that was done purely by image, which I think is also fascinating. So you've got some really, and I guess as we're looking at some of these images that Katherine has brought up on the screen, and again, so worth looking at with us. Just, we'd love to take you through all of these together. This image, the sun and the moon have just been with us for a long time, and they're still with us. So if you want to talk about a couple of these images, Katherine, with the sun and the moon in them.
Yeah, what's nice is in the image of the carved capital, which is the top portion of a column, I loved how this one looked so familiar to the Lindisfarne Stone.
Yeah.
This is in Spain. And hundreds of years later. And yet you still have that same imagery. The only difference is now you have Christ on the cross, and the sun and the moon are in slightly different positions.
Yeah,
It goes back and forth between which side you see them on.
Yeah, there's no hard set rule about where they should just be on either side of the top of the cross. I think that's the
only thing I've heard is traditionally the sun was on Christ's right hand.
That makes sense. That would make sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if the artist who carved this capital was thinking the same way I did, but when the moon moves across the sun in an eclipse, it tends to move off to what would have been Christ's right hand. So I wanted to make sure I showed after he had passed. So it is finished. So to me, having the moon on the right, the sun on the, it's just kind of like it's a moment of it's finished. It's complete.
Yeah.
But then we have a detail from the manuscript, has the sun and moon flipped. But again, that positioning is so important. And again, having the people on either side of Christ.
Yeah.
And sometimes those figures change too.
They do. And do you know what I'm just looking at? If you go back, I'm not asking you to flip back to the, okay, yeah. All right. So you have to flip back to the Doomsday image and you look at the position of the hands of the people. Mm-hmm. So one has their hands raised and the other one has their hands clasped. And if you go back to the manuscript that you were showing, we have one with, one, Our Lady has her hands in prayer, and then St. John kind of has his hands across his chest, but up. So it's a very
of sorrow.
Yeah. But again, very, very similar. You're talking about hundreds of years. One is, all three of these images are from different periods of time. They're different styles, but there's familiarity with with all three of them.
Different locations across.
The different locations across Europe. Yeah. So you can see the connection. You can see the connection in this is why, at this time, you can call this Christendom, because they really were communicating, a lot. There was a lot of back and forth ideas at that time, and especially when it comes to the liturgy and sacred art, the building of these great cathedrals. They were sharing ideas, and the same people were traveling around Europe building different. I mean, if you knew what you were going to do, you could contract out and you could travel. That's not a new idea. They were really quite a lot more mobile, I think, than we give them credit for. And you can really see, sometimes you can't always see the connection in language and other traditions, but if you look at sacred art, you can see these people were definitely in some way connected to one another. And the universality of their images is what's important. Okay, this looks cool.
Oh yeah, this image, courtesy of Jonathan Pajot.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yes, beautiful works. These are liturgical fans that he had carved. These were part of the inspiration for my sun and moon that I did. One great thing in sacred art is you want to look to other traditions, look to what's been done in the past, keep that continuity going.
Yeah.
And so looking for inspiration from other artists. Jonathan Pajot is in the Orthodox Church, and these fans are used by the deacon. And the fans originally were done with usually peacock feathers or other types of feathers. And these, Jonathan has carved those feathers out of wood. And then in the center, he has stone that's carved. One is the sun and one is the moon. Okay.
And so you say these are fans. What are the fans for? Because I'm not familiar with that. What?
Okay, so the fans, and the fans used to be used in both the Eastern and Western rites of the church, or the Orthodox and the Latin church. And in the middle here, I have a picture of a deacon who's using one of the fans. So during the consecration, they move these fans around in a slow, honorable way.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a practical purpose, is to keep the bugs away from the holy elements, the bread and the wine.
Yeah.
Much in the same way that today, priests in the West will use a chalice pall on top of.
Okay. Oh, cool.
To keep the elements pure.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the deacons will do that motion to make sure that nothing gets into the sacred bread and wine or gets on it.
I would love to see that.
It would be beautiful to go there just to watch that movement, just that constant.
Yeah.
And fans like this have been used in processions throughout history.
Yeah.
There's actually images of popes and kings and queens that have been processed, and they'll have those fans there they're a sign of honor. They also have practical purposes of literally fanning someone, cooling them down. Keeping folks in.
And this is something that, not just in, it could be a sign of status. You think about the people, as you said, people, of honor being, you want to they should maintain their dignity. And so you want to, make sure bugs don't kind of land on their noses or whatever. I was also thinking when you mentioned about the feathers, and traditionally they would have been peacock feathers. And if you look closely at the way Jonathan has carved the feathers around the images of the sun and the moon, they do look a little bit like the peacock eyes right at the end. And they're traditionally, this is very ancient Christian imagery. It was believed in the ancient world that peacocks were immortal, like their flesh was immortal, and so in a lot of images from very, very early Christian images, you would see peacocks because that was that kind of people in that time, in that particular part of the world would have understood the message of that peacock, meaning eternal life. So it's nice.
And all those eyes.
Exactly.
Feathers.
Yeah.
Especially when you hear about like angels with all these eyes, and a lot of times when I paint an angel, I love doing peacock feathers in the angel's wings.
Yeah.
They have that vision of God, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's something, and let's face it, they're beautiful.
Oh, yeah. Noisy, but beautiful.
Yeah. They don't have the nicest song, but, or the call, but it's like that. I think that's the other thing is it needs to be beautiful. It needs to be something that you really go, wow, what is that? Not flashy, but, some kind of connection. And so I think with the sun and the moon, this really interesting discovery we made going all the way back to our trip to Lindisfarne, it really struck me how connected we are. And I want to, gosh. We can.
I surprised you. I'm sorry.
I know.
Up just to show how it really is everywhere.
Yeah, maybe edit that out.
To say this, but it's like when you buy a car of a certain color and all of a sudden you see all the cars are the same color.
Yes, exactly.
So after seeing the stone at Lindisfarne and working on that painting, all of a sudden I'm seeing the sun and moon everywhere I look.
Yeah.
So again, we have all these great images, and some of them very old.
Yeah, this one from the Rabula Gospels, it's like 2nd, 3rd century. That's a fresco, isn't it? It's amazing.
No, this is gospel, so it's from a book. So this is...
Sorry. Oh, yeah. I guess you're right.
But again, the image is from a long time ago. It's from, thinking, what is now Syria.
Yeah.
And there's the sun and the moon, and Christ being crucified, and then in the middle there's a stained glass window from a parish here in Michigan, up in the northern area.
Yeah.
And these windows were done in the 19-teens out of Germany. And you have to look real carefully.
That's what I was going to say.
Arm,
oh, yeah, I see it.
The sun, and I love how they have them in like a deep red color as if it's still dark. It has
like that blood. Yeah. And then even it's like the is the sun setting or rising in the back? It's just there's a lot going on there. That's so cool. And again, look at the hands of Our Lady and Saint John the Evangelist. Very very interesting. This whole the postures and everything, just going back and back and back.
Yeah,
back
look at them in the Coptic crucifixion icon.
Yeah.
Mary, she's a little more sorrowful. She's got her shawl up to her face.
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene kneeling at the foot of the cross, and then John still kind of in his surprised yet sorrowful.
Yeah.
This one I thought was fascinating because the face of the sun and the moon is under our little label there.
Yeah.
You can still see it a little bit. There's neat how sometimes the sun and moon have faces and sometimes they don't.
Sometimes they don't. Yeah. And it's interesting. Well, the one from the Rabula Gospels. I'm probably not pronouncing that right, but sorry. You can see that the sun has a face, but the moon doesn't. Yeah. And of course, the one on Lindisfarne, there's nothing. There could have been something a long time ago, but we don't know. Don't you wish you could?
I just want the bottom of the stone. I pray that they find the bottom of the stone. I want to see the whole thing all together.
Yeah.
That would be fabulous.
It would be. But it's, so that's something that I think is really fascinating about sacred art and what should still be there. When we talk about the universality of sacred art, we just looked at images from, the first one, the Syrian one, is that from the 3rd or 4th century, and then Lindisfarne, which is in the 9th or 10th century, all the way to the 19th century. I'm sure if we looked, we would be able to find some from the 20th century. Well, we did, in the 21st century with Jonathan Pajot's carvings, all the way through. And then you can take it all the way back to Scripture, the Old Testament and the New Testament. Oh, yeah.
Your project that you had recently worked on, you came across these beautiful mosaics.
Yes, this is at the Florentine Baptistry in Italy, and I believe these are from the 13th century. And it's the story of Joseph. I did a talk recently about Saint Joseph, and I used Old Testament. Well, I used art to go through the Old Testament. And here, what I think is just genius, what they've done with this first mosaic. This is the 7 days of creation. And it's just ingenious because you have the logos on the top. And
I don't think describe what the logos is. I don't know.
Yes, sorry. Yes. So this is actually an image of Christ as representing the second person of the Trinity, and he is at the day of creation. And I don't think a lot of people think about the second person of the Trinity being present at the creation, but of course he was. All three of them were there, and I think the whole idea of and it almost is a foreshadowing of the Word becoming flesh, because he's here at during the creation of the world. And in this image, you have the sun and the moon, and under the sun is Adam, under the moon is Eve. And of course, then you think about our Lord being the sun and Our Lady being reflected. She reflects the sun. So that is genius theology in this image. And you have the waters and the teeming with life, and you have the land animals. And I think on either side of these pillars, it's a little bit difficult to see, but I'm convinced that must be the elements of some kind, the firmament of the earth or something, because just nothing, I'm just, one pillar has like these waves. I'm thinking, is that supposed to be the wind? And then I'm not quite sure what the other one looks like. It looks a little bit like a giraffe's neck, but I know that's not what they were trying to, I know that's just me not understanding what I'm seeing. But what I think is so great about this image is you can read this image, not only looking at it and going, oh, there's that, there's this, and oh, I recognize that, but it is a theological lesson of the Word made flesh. And they've just done it so beautifully. And there's the sun and the moon. Now, on the second little panel is Joseph dreaming, and Joseph of the Old Testament, who was who foreshadowed Christ, and or he was, I guess, a Christ. A Christ-like figure. Yeah, he foreshadowed. Okay, thank you. And he dreamt that the sun and the moon were bowing down to him, and he said this meant that his family was going to bow down to him.
Don't forget all his little jealous brothers were the stars.
I know, all the sons, and well, yeah, I can understand. I can kind of see where they were coming from sometimes. Yeah. But and then you can see also the wheat, the one, all the stalks of wheat bowing down to the one, and he was the one that they were bowing down to. Interestingly, this is in a baptistry. So you think, what does this have to do with baptism? But that's for another story or another podcast, I think. I would absolutely love to go to this baptistry and really explore. And, so I think when you see how the sun and moon has been used throughout history, different parts of the world, I would say, I want to encourage our listeners to take a look and see if you can find the sun and the moon in your local parish, church, or cathedral. If you like to haunt museums the way I do, when you go to sometimes you can't always rely on what the information is that the museums are giving you, but now you have a little bit more information to discover something that has been in Christendom since the very beginning, and we made lots of discoveries on that island, and there's
more and more to discover for sure.
Absolutely. And I think, and if it hadn't been for you, just there was so much to take in, to be fair.
Yeah.
There. But you spotted that. So kudos to Katherine for spotting it.
It just happened to be like right in the middle of what I was working on. So thank you, Lord, for another bit of inspiration on my work.
Yeah, absolutely. And can I just say one more thing? If there are any artists out there listening, and if you're thinking about what is this whole sacred art thing? Is this something that I really, should I dip my toes into it? Start looking at all of these symbols that have been around for a long time and will be around for a long time. There are some things that come and go, but there are certain images that have been here. So start thinking about that and how you can utilize these things in your art.
And really look for inspiration to other really good artists that are out there. Jonathan Pageau does a fabulous job with his work, and he also does a podcast, talks about symbolism and understanding it.
Yeah.
So it's a great resource for sacred artists, artists in general, just to understand the message that you're putting out there. You may think it's just for you, but when you put an image out there, it's going to speak to people around them.
Exactly. And it's important that the message is understood. And sometimes, and the thing that I think is really wonderful about sacred art, and especially, just our experience on Lindisfarne, it's almost difficult to put into words. When we saw that connection to the island through the art, we were connected to that island. Now, little did I know that I was really connected to the island.
Yeah, you are.
As a Lindsay.
Go back and own it. That's yours.
But we made that connection. We were immediately connected to those monks on the island who were laboring prayerfully every day and going out and evangelizing. And there was
a moment of taking the island back. When we went into, there's another chapel which has another great story for us to image for us to talk about. But we did take the time to say the Angelus on the prayer.
Yes.
To bring back a little bit of the holy to what sometimes it's just a tourist site.
Yes, exactly. And I have to say, just to go full circle, it was lovely to see a commemorative plaque, and this was commemorative, from the people of Norway. And it was my buddy, Saint Olav, or Olav den Helge. And it was a plaque for reparations of all of the raids. And when we were in Norway, many times there were Norwegians who would go over on pilgrimage, and they would do reparations for what had happened to that island, which I think is beautiful. So again, it's kind of, this is the thing about this island. It's almost timeless. It's outside of time and space. It's so weird. And if you ever get to go to that island, absolutely jump at the chance, but watch the tidal times.
Yes. Pay attention.
Yeah. Or get a place to stay on the island. Because if you'll be sleeping in your car if you're not fast enough.
I'm ready to go back because I want to just spend a whole week on that island. It's got a lot to offer just in the way it's laid out. And this got sand dunes. Just that had me at sand dunes.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I will have to mention this. There is something called the St. Cuthbert's Pilgrimage, and it is it's from Durham to Lindisfarne, and we're going to do that pilgrimage. I don't know if we're going to do it this summer or not, but my husband wants to walk. Like, I want to leave. I want to start from Lindisfarne and go to Durham. But actually, you're supposed to do it the other way around. But I'm scared. I don't want to be walking when the tide. I'm just so afraid of the tide because I can't swim. So that's why I think I'll be like the only other person.
Donald will not let you.
I'll be walking so fast across that causeway. Yeah, running.
So definitely a next time. Have to get back there. And for our next episode, we're gonna have to bring things back a little to basics.
Yeah,
so we've been talking about all these great images. We saw some beautiful images throughout history, and a lot of them have color.
Yes.
And we're gonna have to talk about color in sacred art. Color has significance, not just in sacred art, but in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
And so we're going to kind of tip off on how all of that fits into the greater purpose within sacred art.
Do you know what? Honestly, I can't wait. I can't wait to hear about this because this is not my subject of expertise. I think Katherine is really the one that can go into this, and it's really fascinating. So, yeah, don't miss that one.
A daughter who's an interior designer and just tipped me off on a lot of things I should and should not do with colors.
There you go. But it's what I think is interesting is it's a little bit of a science today, but it wasn't something that was necessarily a science a long time ago with sacred art, but it definitely was a tradition. And somehow that tradition works very neatly with the science. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, exactly.
So a little bit of a coincidence there, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, I think this has been fun. And I hope, yes. So everyone keep your eyes peeled for the sun and the moon. And if you find anything, we would love for you to show us some of the images you find, maybe on Discord. Is that how we would encourage people?
Let's share some images that we find out there.
Yeah,
if you have
absolutely.
A chance, if you've only listened to this, try to get through the video so that you have a chance to see the images, pause them, maybe zoom in, take a closer look, and then we will put posts to all the images that we've talked about and to Jonathan Pajot's work so that you can take a look and see what he has out there.
Perfect.
All right,
okay.
Until next time, I'm Katherine Laffrey.
And I'm Alix Murray. And we hope that you find something beautiful.
Bye-bye.
Bye.